with Diva, it's with Diva I decided that I really wanted her to contain basically wisdom of the ages. The difference between the Brown Bomber and Diva is really that Diva has seen it all. Nothing about human behavior surprises her. The Brown Bomber is just the opposite. He can't believe human beings are the way they are. The next strip is a strip that is exclusive to the politics that were going on in Portland at the time. Drew Davis was an elected official who was very anti-gay. And this is
As a gay leader fighting for gay rights, I think it's unwise to dwell on the problems of lesbians, people of color, the handicapped, the aged, etc., etc., etc. In fact, I don't think we should linger on the rights of embarrassing drag queens and the leather boys. Hell, let's get down to brass tacks. Let's just concentrate on GWMs, gay white males like me. The only thing in the way of my being accepted into the old boy network is my gayness. I deserve the right not to have homophobia prevent me from joining my brothers in open expressions of racism, sexism, and oops. I got carried away. What I mean is, if we as gay men win our rights, we'll make sure the rest of you get yours.
Wow, you were right, Diva. He's the most upfront GWM leader yet.
You watch your step, Bomber, or you won't even be given the right to wear that do-rag around your head.
So I was really aware that there were other gay cartoons out, but I got to the point where I understood that I had a perspective that was different from what I was reading. I could critique our community. I was in this position of seeing a lot of white gay men talk about how sensitive they were merely by virtue of being gay. But I also observed the sexism within that group, and I observed the racism within the group. And I ended up really embracing the fact that I had a perspective that wasn't out there. So there were a lot of things that were going on in the media, and a lot of things certainly having to do with racial tension in this country. And so I would encounter so many just common perceptions of being African American stereotypes. And I got to the point where I would get together around other people of color, and we would talk about all these things that would irritate us that we had to go through with general white community, the community at large. And I came up with this concept. I wanted to be able to figure out a way for people to get it instantly. You know, you don't want to constantly explain to people. You know, if you're in a same-sex couple, who's the man and who's the woman? You know, we've all gone through that. You know, being African American in this country, the whole issue black people have about white people touching their hair. And so I wanted to create some way they could get it immediately. And I started thinking about the old World War II movies that featured fighter planes, and there'd be the pilot and the co-pilot, and the plane would get hit by enemy fire, and the co-pilot would go crazy and go, "Oh my God, we're gonna crash, we're gonna crash." And then the pilot would slap him. And the co-pilot would say, "Oh, thanks, I needed that." And so I thought of that as a form of therapy, so I created Slaphology, which is an reaction-based science or method of addressing mental abnormalities, perception disorders, and/or other forms of bad-mindedness through the ancient technique of slapping as therapy to promote clear thinking. Now, I hesitated with this concept because I knew especially within the community I was in, that people would say this was promoting violence. But it was during the Reagan administration that I thought, I just want people to be able to get it without constantly going through this long, drawn-out thing. So shortly after even creating Slapology, I introduced 2 new characters to the comic strip. And their names were Ray and Kay Sedilla. And I created them as a really conservative Republican foil that were like had the opposite attitudes of the Brown Bomber and Diva. And Ray and Kay Sedilla had an infant named Gaylord. And his nickname is Gay Sedilla, but they didn't figure that out in the beginning. And so throughout the strip, at one point in the strip, they get introduced to the public, and then in the next strip, I introduce Gaylord, and he's only seen in a bassinet. And Ray and Kay Sedilla they're going to an event, and they need someone to babysit their son, and the only people who can do it is Brown Bomber and Diva. And so they leave, and when they get back, they find out that their little baby, Gaylord's first words, he says, Simon DeColey. And Ray and Kay Sedilla basically say, these are his first words. Who is Simon McCauley? And the Brown Bomber explains Simon McCauley is a South African gay activist. And in the media. And I do admire The Simpsons. And I really wanted to pay homage to some of the cartoon characters that really meant a lot to me. So I've done a number of cartoon strips that really do honor those characters. So eventually, after being in the Bay Area for 7 years and having met my partner Scott Stapley, we ended up moving back to Portland. And one of the things that is one of the highlights for me in the history of Cathartic Comics was one day I got a call from a playwright in San Francisco saying that he wanted to create a stage production and he wanted to include his favorite comic strip characters. And I was very flattered that the Brown Bomber and Diva were 2 of the characters that he wanted to include in this stage production. So I said, yes, that would be great. And about a year later, he invited Scott and I down. They invited us down for the premiere of a play called Out of the Inkwell. That, I was influenced by his strip, Bloomsbury. This is the chapter 6 in the book. I stopped drawing my comic strip in '96 because of an automobile accident. Happened to me during a weekend. I was in Mississippi for my grandmother's funeral, which was on a Saturday. And the next day on Sunday, I was involved in an accident on a 2-lane road, and sustained injuries and became paraplegic. It's really one of the most special parts of this story in the book is what happened when I came back to Portland from Mississippi, really from Memphis, and the community basically wrapped itself around Scott and I and supported us through such a hard time. I remember going back to work, and it was I was working at Just Out at the time, and I got a package in the mail, and it was from Alison Bechtel. Hopefully most of you know Alison Bechtel. Dykes to Watch Out For, and then she eventually wrote Fun Home. I had interviewed her for one of the newspapers in the Bay Area years before, and had hooked up with her at some of the gay writers conferences, one in Boston and one in San Francisco. She decided that she wanted to send a get well card, and she wanted other artists to be a part of that card. This is around April 1996, after I was home from the trying to recover in the hospital. And she sent this string of cards. I opened this box, and there was this one panel there. And I pulled that out, and then the next one and the next one. She had gotten in contact with all of these cartoonists from all over the country, and they contributed to this string of cards. It's one of the things that made me realize yet another community that I really, really embraced, and that was the community of cartoonists. And so many of them are really played a part of the book being created. This is more of a close-up of some of those panels. A group of people here in Portland decided to get together to honor what they considered gay elders in the community that had, just been a part of the community and done, a number of, good work. And they approached me and said that they basically took 25 local people, elders, and wanted to honor them, and they assigned each of us to different artists. And so these figures here were created by this artist, and he is from New York. And so they gave him my background, my career, stories of just my background here in Portland, and these are the figurines he came up with. So I really wanted to kind of highlight his creativity. I really like being able to inspire that. So that's pretty much what I have, except I'm honoring two more of my cartoon heroes in this last panel. Franklin of Peanuts fame, and when I was younger, the cartoon strip, the cartoon TV series that featured Johnny Quest was one of my favorite characters. So I just want to thank you guys for indulging me here, and this is just meant to be a fairly quick overview of my career as a cartoonist. Thank you.
There he is. Hey, how are you all? I'm going to steal a chair here. I don't know that I even need the mic. My name is Andy Mangels. I am the past editor of Gay Comics for a long, long time. And I've known Rupert since the early 1990s. He was the first openly gay African-American cartoonist in the world. In any form, I was the first openly gay queer person in mainstream comic books. So we share some history and some groundbreakingness between us, but I would like to point out some of the things that he didn't say in his introduction, because there's so many things that Rupert has been a part of in this community. Rupert was, I missed the very start of your speech, but did you talk about being on the Portland Town Council? The group there in the early 80s, late 70s?
No.
So you've been a part of things all the way back then, and as far as I can tell, probably one of the earliest African-American queer politician or political types that's been in Portland. You founded Brother to Brother. You co-founded Just Out newspaper. It was Portland Town Council, right? Mm-hmm. Was it Sandy Directors Group? You've obviously been a major part of how Portland has seen its Black queer history. What inspired you to be that open at a time when even gay white men were having a problem being open, much less people of color?
Well, the Portland Town Council was the first major queer rights organization here in Portland. And I don't know, at the time, I don't even think I really took in the fact that I was the first African American on the board. And when they invited me to be a part of the board, I think it was their attempt to make sure they had a person of color there. And I was approached by the head of the organization to be a part of the group. And I remember he invited me to lunch. And I was honored because I'd seen him in the media, on television, everything, as this gay spokesperson. And so we sat there at lunch, and I'm like thrilled. And he started telling me that he was working with the board, and there were women on the board, and he felt like they were having some difficulty with the women because the women weren't just focusing on the rights of queer people. They were also advocating for the rights of women. And he's talking to me, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to have those same concerns as a person of color. So I think it was really interesting to be a part of that board. But what came out of it was that I went to the board and said, look, we really need to do more outreach to communities of color and different aspects of the queer community. And they said, well, you're on the board, why don't you do it? So that pissed me off, but I knew I was there, so I basically was a part of creating the Diversity Alliance within the framework of Portland Town Council. And we ended up doing a lot of fundraising for the umbrella group. So I'm really proud of that because we did things like hold forums that brought like Jewish gay people together, and I remember we did a forum called Homophobia, Racism, and Sexism, and How They Are Not Alike. Oh. So yeah, that was a special part of my history here in Portland.
I would say that when I came out in Portland, which was '87, that yourself and Lady Elaine Peacock were probably the only two African American people that were out here in a public way, that were actually put out as public leaders. I want you to address who is, and again, I missed the very start of your talk, so in case you talk about this, just say, I already covered that enough. Who is Professor I.B. Getting down?
I think initially I created the persona of Professor I.B. Getting Down as a DJ. I used to be a DJ around town, and mostly I catered to people of my generation. So I did a lot of old school music, and it was another area that I appreciated being able to give to the community because there were so many fundraisers built around dances and different special events like that. So the first time I used that name was as a disc jockey. But then when I moved to being art director of certain publications, I was listed as Rupert Kinnard art director, and I didn't want the comic strip to say Rupert Kinnard, author of Cathartic Comics. So I decided I'll just have Cathartic Comics, attributed to Professor I.D. getting down. So that's how it happened.
You didn't want any nepotism going on.
Oh, exactly.
You're already art directing. You don't want the nepotism of, hey, I put this brilliant comic strip in I.D. Speaking of brilliant comic strips, your first black superhero was Superbad?
Yes.
Did you talk about that already?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Well, then we'll skip over that question. The one thing that you didn't talk about here is that recently you've become one of the subjects of a major motion picture. Well, at least major for PBS.
Right.
So, No Straight Lines is a film that shows up regularly on PBS now. It just came out about a year and a half ago. And that is a documentary about, I believe it's 6, if I'm remembering my count right. It's five major LGBTQ comic creators and what their careers were, what their work has meant to the public and so forth, including Alison Bechdel and Howard Cruz and yourself. What has that done for you as both a comic creator and how has that made you look back at your legacy?
Well, it's a good question. Really, at every step of my career as a cartoonist and even as a graphic designer, things have happened that has given me a perspective that I didn't have before. So I had great admiration for Howard Cruz. Howard Cruz is really known as like the godfather of gay comics, and the artistry of Alison Bechdel. So when I was approached, like so many times when I've been approached in that way, I tend to think that there's been a mistake. I think I know how did you think to include me among those folks? But, I push all of that aside and I become involved wholeheartedly. So when they approached me to be part of that full-length documentary, and they came to Portland and they followed me and Scott around for a couple of days and really, really extensive interviewing. When the film came out, it was just kind of shocking when you realize how much they interviewed the things that they decide to, focus on. And I was just really pleased to be a part of it. And I really liked that they featured the story about Alison Bechdel sending me the string of comics.
Right. Did you introduce Scott to the audience, by the way? Did you introduce Scott to the audience?
No.
So, right here in the black and tan orange bowling shirt, this is husband Scott. Oh, what, you are married? Oh,
no, I was just interviewed on cable earlier, and I was talking about this.
So you advocated for gay marriage?
Of course we did.
And gay divorce.
I always feel like we never want to insult people by giving our opinion about marriage in general. We don't believe in it. And so we've been together for 35 years and we're not married. But the whole idea of our support was that we simply believed in the right of people who wanted to get married should be able to get married. So he's not my husband.
But awfully close to it.
Damn close.
There's another part of you that exists here in Portland that people drive by almost every day and may not even realize. Give us a big smile. approximate the picture. You're on a mural here in Portland. Do you want to talk about that, where it is, and how that came about?
Well, first of all, I would say that that story is in the book, like so much of what we talked about. And being a part of that mural is still harkens back to exactly what I said about when I'm approached, I chuckle. So someone calls me out of the blue and said, we're thinking about creating this mural downtown and we think that you should be a part of it. And for me, it was like, why do you think I should be a part of this mural? And they said, well, you've done, we feel like you're an activist, you're out, gay. And as they explain that, I still don't understand it. I still say, yeah, if you want to do it. And I'm visualizing, a corner of a building somewhere. But then what they did, they said, you are a part of this mural because of your love of community. And that gets me. If you tell me I'm an activist and I'm this or I'm that, it doesn't compute. But when you tap into what I feel about being a part of a community, that I'm so clear of what the community has meant to me and how passionate I am about the community. It's the whole reason why I fell in love with Portland, was because I just ended up finding a spot in these different places. And so that's the way I end up accepting that it makes some sense that I might at least be approached to be a part of it. So yeah, the mural in Chicago, where I grew up, I grew up on the street called Aberdeen. And when my father passed away, he was such a supporter of the neighborhood and our street that it wasn't even after he passed away. I think it was a number of years before he passed away. The neighborhood got together and went to the city, and they named that stretch of street Rupert Kinnard Street. And I remember thinking, that's just the greatest honor that my father could ever get. And at the time, I thought of that as my father being honored by his neighborhood. But in fact, I think my father was as much a lover of community as I ended up being. So I equated that part of the street being named after my father, which I thought, well, here, my father ends up with the best tribute ever. There's no way that could ever happen to me. And then, of course, after he died is when, I got the honor of being put on that mural. And once again, the thing is, I visualized it possibly being this small thing. And when they unveiled it,
8 feet tall.
I was just blown away.
Right. What is the address of that for those who haven't, who can't picture where or want to go see where the mural is?
It's like Davis and Broadway. Davis and Broadway. It's really across the street from Embers.
Badlands.
Badlands. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the parking lot there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to Badlands, which used to be the Embers, it's the parking lot across the street. It's that chunk of huge, enormous chunk of wall.
And I'm so much more affected by the fact that my face, among all of these other faces, big faces, is a big face. And then there's this tiny little brown bomber and diva.
Right.
I'm much more taken by the fact that the brown bomber and diva made it to a mural than me.
Right. One of the things you and I talked about a couple days ago was an interesting way in which you classify yourself as a cartoonist / comic artist in the world of comics. And it's one of the things that I have dealt with in my career and other queer creators. For instance, Von Frick, who's sitting here in the front row, is also in the gay comic scene. I don't know who else is here, because I haven't looked at much of the crowd much, but you classify yourself very specifically, and there's the reasons for that are to kind of say, here's where I fall in the scheme of things.
Well, this is a perfect environment for that. I've been referred to as a comic book artist, cartoonist, and I've never drawn a comic book. And I admire comic book artists so much that when people refer to me as someone who's drawn comic books, I'm very clear that I've drawn a comic strip, and I think the distinction is pretty strong.
But even in talking, you kind of separated yourself out in terms of the world of comic strips and saying, well, it's not Peanuts, it's not Garfield, etc. How do you think you fit in the history of comic strips?
Well, I just generally think it's unusual, the whole history of the strip, given that initially I created one character and I thought, I'm satisfied with this character only being within the confines of my sketchbook. I'm just having fun drawing them. And then going to college and having them wanting me to do a general editorial cartoon on the editorial page, which traditionally is just one square and a caption underneath, which I so admire the artistry of political cartoonists that way. And I started out with the one panel, but I couldn't get the hang of it, so it went to 4 panels. So the whole combination of superhero, fairy, black, gay, editorial, at some point, one of the things about the book to me is it just celebrates all of these elements coming together. And anyone who considers themselves a fan of the comic strip, I'm always so thrilled about it because it just doesn't connect to anything that's really out there. And I was really aware at a certain point that the subject matter of cathartic comics was unique for that time strip. There's just so many things I've encountered in this culture I've never seen in a comic strip. And I think I'd be crazy at some point not to realize the uniqueness of what that was, what that ended up being.
Right. Did you talk about where Cathartic Comics came from, the title?
No.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. What the heck is Cathartic Comics, and how did that come about?
Well, it was just out when Renee and Jay wanted the comic strip. All along before that, the entire time it ran in the newspaper in college, the strip was called The Brown Bomber. So the minute I knew that I wanted there to be equal footing between, just having created Diva and then the Brown Bomber, I had to come up with a name. It could have been Vivi and the Diva, could have been the name of the strip, but I didn't go in that direction. I just thought of the comic strip as a reflection of my own beliefs and my perspective. So I thought, well, there's something cathartic about it. So let's just call it Cathartic Comics. And the coolest thing about having done that at that point is it really felt like a throwaway title. It just sounded good. But as the years went on, more and more I got a sense of just how cathartic the strip was for me. Because there'd be things happening in the media that I would get so angry about, I would want to include it in the strip, But the challenge was for me to find the humor. There were just, there's another word I always use, and I'm just blanking on it. Something serendipitous about it, and the irony of it. So it was always a challenge to take things that really pissed me off and try to figure out a way to make fun of it. So the name Cathartic Comics really worked, and I remember putting together strips just for a second collection of the second collection of the comic strip, just to put in front of other publishers to possibly get published. And I remember thinking, these comics are they have been so cathartic for me. And I thought, God, what if the name of the book was Oops, I Just Catharted? Because each of these comic strips are like little catharsis. And so there was one publisher that approached me knowing about the comic strip. And they said, would you be interested in maybe us publishing a collection of your comic strips? And I said, well, I've already, for 10 years, I've been working on the history of it, and that incorporates almost all of the comic strips. And the name of the book is Oops, I Just Catharted. And they were kind of taken aback by that, and it made me think that they're not the right publisher for me. So the publisher that ended up publishing it, Deck Press, when they found out the name of it, they went, "Oh my God, that's the perfect name for your book."
Right.
So it's very special to me for the strip to be named Cathartic Comics, because as I said, through the years, it's been more and more cathartic, and it really has served a purpose in terms of my own mental health.
Well, I've got 3 more questions, and then we're going to wrap up, and if the audience has questions, we'll do that, and you can get to your signing. You brought up the book as it exists, which is for sale here today, and we definitely want to thank Floating World Comics for having a signing with you. This is your first signing in Portland, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that they did this, that they allowed this to happen. It hasn't happened a lot in the history of Portland that the comic book stores have been so supportive that they have had signings of queer creators. It's only happened less than a handful of times. I can probably count it on 2 fingers. One of the aspects of this book, it is published by a trans publisher. It is also, I compared it online the other day when I was talking about this, and somebody asked me how's the book look, and I said, this book looks like something that would have come from Taschen. This book is so well laid out and so professionally done that I was amazed when I was looking at it with you right there, and I was like, did you lay this down? And it shows that you have an art directing background, because the book is really stupendous. So I hope you're all going to buy a copy. If not, at least look through it to see how good a small press publisher can make something work if he's got a good subject.
Well, shout out to Deck Press for a lot of reasons. My vision of the book was smaller than what they had. I thought this book would just be another smaller paperback book, but they insisted that it be hardback, and whenever I came across something that I thought would really work well in the book, they welcomed it. They weren't against 4 more pages being added to add more content to it. So it's almost like a nightmare of mine to approach a big publisher and just give the strips to them and have them do what they want. So for Deck Press to embrace my vision of what I wanted to put out, And this is the reason I'm in awe of the book, because when I hold it, after 10 years of working on a book on the desktop, and you're visualizing the end result being something you can hold in your hand. When it came in the mail and I held it in my hands, I thought, this is the vision I had for this. And nothing could have been more rewarding for me. It wasn't left in the hands of someone and then you get it and you go, wow, this is just not, everything that's wrong, most of the things that might be wrong with it would be on me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you're the only one that's going to know that they're wrong, too.
Right.
So one more question about your past, and then we're going to talk about your future. So in the past, you are under kind of those of you who haven't lived in Portland for a long time, or even those of you who have, may not understand how rarefied the comic strip air is in Portland. But you actually edited and or worked with Matt Groening, Linda Berry, Callahan, and in fact you have kind of stories about about those people. So those are, Matt Groening, for those of you who don't know, The Simpsons. Linda Berry with her strips is, she's now a college professor. Callahan was another paraplegic cartoonist that has had a movie made about his life.
That's right.
Give us just some thoughts about being in a very rarefied area as a Portland cartoonist who also edited those Portland cartoons.
Well, I never edited them. I would say what it was is that our paths crossed in different ways, and a number of them our paths crossed because I worked at Atlanta Week. But I became aware, that obviously the Pacific Northwest itself is quite a hub for cartoonists, but specifically Seattle and Portland are really special within that world. Callahan is interesting. I was just saying in an interview on cable earlier, when I ran into him, when I first met him, he was quadriplegic, and I was very able-bodied long before my accident. And I admired his strip so much, and he would, we would just talk comics. He knew about cathartic comics. And he was just a very odd guy, but I really enjoyed his company. And then I moved away, was in the Bay Area for 7 years, came back, was here for a number of years before my accident, and it left me paraplegic. And I ran into Callahan, and it was, one of those really ironic things. I run into him, he goes, "What are you doing in a wheelchair?" He had no idea. And it's almost like I could have joked, but I wanted to be more like you. But it was a special relationship after that. The fact that we were both, in wheelchairs and we were cartoonists. I wouldn't say we were like great friends, but we definitely spent some time together, and it was one of those situations where we loved talking comics. I was obviously a real defender of his because there were so many people. He was so controversial because of his humor, and because he was quadriplegic, he could get away with that humor. But his work appeared separately from people knowing he was the one doing it. Right. So there'd be these cartoons out about people in wheelchairs and going across the desert without their legs because they left their wheelchair somewhere. And it was hard for me to even imagine looking at those strips, not knowing he was paraplegic, because you just thought, this is a really horrible person.
So let's talk about Rupert in the future. You talked the other day about how you're not drawing a lot now, but what is going to come next? You've got the book about your past is here. You're in a movie. You're on murals. There's a certain level that you've attained now. What's next?
Well, even before Oops, I Just Catharted, working on that, my life's work, the thing that I really devoted easily, without exaggeration, 40 years on the Life Capsule Project. And it was kind of in response to what Howard Cruz did with Stuck Rubber Baby, which is semi-autobiographical, and Alison Bechdel did with Fun Home. But I don't have the discipline at all. As I said, I'm not a comic book artist. So I came up with a way to present my own journey as a creative person within the pages of the Life Capsule Project as a photo album, timeline, graphic memoir. It's just a conglomeration of all these things. And I would like Oops, I Just Catharted to do well enough that I can go back to the Life Capsule Project as something I want to have out there. And the idea of the Life Capsule Project isn't simply to reveal my life to people, but I feel as if I've developed a way of looking at my life and dissecting it to appreciate it more and more. All of these different elements that I think is unique for all of us to see together. I mean, I'm fortunate that when I look at all of those things, I'm really grateful for how they all came together. And so for anyone who appreciates their lives, I want them to look at the format of the Life Capsule Project and imagine doing their own overview of their lives in that way. And I always thought that if you're a parent doing it for your kids or other people, it would be a great gift, for them. So I'm really, hoping that I can continue working on that.
Well, certainly graphic memoirs of the type that, as you said, with Fun Home, Stuck Rubber Baby, and so forth, are, and I think you probably have a whole section of them here at this store. They're very much a thing, and I know I'm working on mine. I couldn't crack it until I was told by my sister who one of my uncles was, which was Alan Turing, and suddenly I had a way in, talking about me as a kid who didn't commit suicide, of what I've managed to do with my career, and the changes I've made, and Alan Turing, who accomplished so much and then did commit suicide, and wondering at what point would the guy who helped end World War II have made the world so much better had he not, been forced that. So that was kind of my way in. Do you have, you've really done so much. Do you have a log line for your capsule project?
That book, the Life Capsule Project, is like 85% done. But one of the interesting aspects of it is that I worked all that time on the book on my computer, and then I got it to the point where it was exactly my vision. Everything about the book was there, but it hadn't been proofread and edited. And I took a thumb drive of all this work I did. I took it to PSU and gave it to them when they were doing print on demand. They don't do it anymore. I gave them the thumb drive, and within an hour, they printed out a bound edition, and I have like 2 copies, and it was in black and white. And once I had it in my hands, it was like, well, this is what I wanted. And so the drive to go beyond that, to promote it, or to seek other publishers, I don't have that gene. I have the creative gene. It was great to work on it, and once I held it in my hands, it was just weird. But when you talked about, I think a lot of times when you're a writer or you're a creative person, sometimes if you want to do something that's personal, you do need to find a way in. And for me, for the longest time, with the Life Capsule Project, I couldn't even approach it because I thought it was too self-serving, and I didn't want to keep writing, I did this, I did that, I did that. So I was stuck for the longest time. And then one day, I thought, the Brown Bomber and Diva, what if I write it, if they're the ones telling the story? Bam. I just started writing in there. Each chapter was alternating between the Brown Bomber telling the story, and then the next chapter, Diva would tell. Awesome. And it made writing it so much more fun, and I didn't feel like I was being, self-absorbed, even though we know ultimately. But it was a way in to be able to, resist that one thing that was kind of a writer's block.
Right. Well, it is called autobiographical, so, self-serving is a part of it. But, okay, so one more question. It did occur to me, and then we're going to wrap up. Coleman Domingo is a big star on Broadway. You mentioned Fun Home, which, of course, won Tony Awards for Alison Bechdel on Broadway. What are the odds? Has anybody ever approached you? And this is going on Facebook Live, so if you happen to be watching it, you're a Broadway producer. What are the odds? What do you think of a Brown Bomber and the Diva or a cathartic musical?
Well, that's funny. I mean, I thought you were going to just say a play. Obviously, I've seen them on stage. That was really cool. No, in the early days in San Francisco, I remember there was a guy who really liked the comic strip, and he actually wrote a proposal for a movie. And a number of years later, I wrote a treatment for what I imagined a Brown Bomber movie being. And that was another situation where I had a writer's block because I didn't know how to write a screenplay. But for many decades, I've written journals. So I wrote the whole thing in the form of a journal. Like, the name of the event of the day had a title and then the date. And so I wrote, it was maybe, it ended up being something like 110 pages. And I still have that.
That's a 2-hour movie. You just need to add the songs in, and then you've got your musical.
Well, that reminds me, there were 2 occasions where I was really familiar with a certain work of literature. One was The Color Purple, and I knew the woman who wrote the definitive biography of Alice Walker, with Alice Walker. Evelyn C. White is her name. And I remember Evelyn came to visit us once, and she was the very first person who told me that she had just heard from Alice Walker that The Color Purple was going to be turned into a musical. And I went, how is that possible? And then they did it, and it was pretty successful. Yeah. And then I remember hearing from Allison that they were turning Fun Home into a musical. Once again, I'm like, how?
I had the same thought. I was like, how?
But she is a bit of a friend, and Scott and I got in touch with her when there was a gay comics conference in New York around the time it debuted on Broadway, and I got in contact with her, shamelessly asked her if she could get us tickets, and she ended up buying us tickets with her ticket. So we sat with her on Broadway, watching this musical about her life, and she's sitting right next to me. So that was a life event.
Right. Everybody, I hope that this has convinced you, if you weren't already going to buy the book, to get the book from Rupert here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us all here today. Thank you so much for sharing your talent. And more importantly, thank you so much for sharing your activism and your passion for the last 50 some years here in Portland to help make things better for everyone.
Well, I need to thank you. Just agreeing to do this. This is not a mutual admiration society necessarily, but he's a comic book historian. Comics, I mean, I don't want to even limit you to comic books. The fact that you agreed to do this and the respect I have for the work you've done, it made this a really special event for me. Thank you.
Everybody, Rupert Kinnard. We're going to open this up down to questions. If you want to raise your hand. Anyone? We just interviewed you so well, there's no questions.